March 17, AD 180, Marcus Aurelius dies. He doesn't die in Rome. He dies at Vindobona, today's Vienna, on the Danube, for decades one of the empire's most delicate frontier lines anywhere. At that moment, the empire is near its peak, from Britain to North Africa, and from the Iberian Peninsula to Syria in the east. To defend it, Rome maintains 28 to 30 legions and roughly the same number of auxiliaries, more than 300,000 men in all. They aren't concentrated in one place. They're spread across the main fronts: the Rhine and the Danube in the north, Syria and the Euphrates in the east, and across the key hubs that move grain from Africa and Egypt into Italy. It's a huge machine, costly and already under strain. And Marcus Aurelius dies on one of those frontiers because that's where the empire's security is decided. Within a few decades, this power will enter the greatest crisis in its history. Not because Rome runs out of soldiers or suddenly becomes fragile. The real shift is political. The rules change. The rules that decide who truly has the right to command the army. When does that shift happen? And why, once it begins, can Rome not stop it? In AD 180, Rome rules a territory of over 1.9 million square miles. It is organized into dozens of provinces, linked by a road network of more than 50,000 miles of paved routes, built to move armies even more than goods. It's an imposing network, but major movements across it still require time, planning, and resources. The issue isn't Rome's total strength, but where that strength is deployed. The distribution of legions creates constraints the empire can't quickly undo. These forces aren't distributed evenly. Top priority is the Danube frontier, where for more than 10 years Marcus Aurelius fought the Marcomanni, the Quadi, and other peoples capable of straining the entire border. Roughly 9 to 11 legions are concentrated here, because the Danube isn't just a frontier. It's an invasion corridor leading straight toward the Balkans and northern Italy itself. A second major deployment sits on the Rhine, a long, fragmented frontier that can be crossed at many points. Here, the legions aren't meant to conquer. They're meant to react quickly to raids and sudden shifts, maintaining a continuous presence. So in AD 180, the Roman army isn't a mobile strike force. Each legion sits where it has to, and moving one means exposing another stretch of the frontier.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
On the evening of December 31, AD 192, Emperor Commodus is assassinated in Rome. Within hours, the seat of power is suddenly vacant. What follows in 193 is one of the most unstable moments in Roman history. In under 12 months, 5 men claim the imperial title, while central power changes hands repeatedly between Rome and the frontiers throughout the empire. On January 1, 193, the Senate proclaims Pertinax emperor, an elderly, respected general chosen to restore order and discipline. He lasts less than 3 months. On March 28th, he is killed by the Praetorian Guard, angered by austerity measures and by delays in paying promised donatives, the cash bonuses the Praetorians now demand at every succession from every emperor. Immediately afterward, for the first time, the throne is openly put up for auction. Didius Julianus buys it by promising higher rewards to the Praetorians. Rome has an emperor, but no army behind him. His authority doesn't reach beyond the city walls. In the provinces, the reaction is immediate. On the Danube, the legions proclaim Septimus Severus. In Syria, other troops acclaim Pescennius Niger. In Britain, the army backs Clodius Albinus. 3 emperors rise far from Rome, each with an army ready to march. In June 193, Septimus Severus, proclaimed in the spring by the Danubian legions, marches on Rome. Behind him stand the Danube legions, among the empire's most experienced and numerous. Didius Julianus is executed after 9 weeks. The empire enters a civil war that will only end after years of fighting. The lesson is clear. Rome and the Senate no longer choose the emperor. The legions choose him directly out on the frontiers. Septimus Severus's first decision as emperor is to control armed force in the capital. In 193, after taking power, he orders the Praetorian Guard disbanded, the elite corps that for more than 2 centuries has guarded the emperor's security inside the city of Rome. The Guard numbers about 9,000 men, well-paid and politically decisive. In recent years, it hasn't merely protected the throne. It killed Pertinax, auctioned the empire, and proved it could create and destroy emperors without ever leaving the capital. The Praetorians are disarmed, stripped of privileges, and sent away from Rome. In their place, Severus forms a new guard by choosing men directly from the Danube legions. It's a crucial shift. The emperor's security is no longer entrusted to an urban, semi-autonomous corps, but to soldiers tied personally to the ruler and his military career. Meanwhile, civil war flares. Between 193 and 194, Septimus Severus defeats Pausanias Niger after campaigns in Asia Minor and Syria, securing control of the east. In the west, however, another rival remains: Clodius Albinus, commander of the legions in Britain. To avoid opening a second front, Severus recognizes him as Caesar for a time, presenting him as the designated heir. It's a tactical choice, not a lasting compromise, and it can't last. Once the Eastern Front is secured, Severus names Caracalla his heir, and the deal with Albinus collapses. In 197, Severus faces Albinus in Gaul at the Battle of Lugdunum. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers fight on both sides, one of the largest battles between imperial armies in Rome's history. Severus's victory ends the civil war and leaves the empire in the hands of one master, Septimus Severus alone, at last. From then on, the army is strengthened systematically. Soldiers' pay rises by about 50%, and recruitment expands. Soldiers' marriages are legalized, deepening the army's roots in the provinces. And Legio II Parthica is stationed at Albanum, just outside Rome, a mobile legion guarding the capital and a tool of political control. Loyalty is tied to the emperor, not to Rome itself. In this new balance, the Senate loses its central role, and key decisions shift ever more toward military commands and frontier headquarters across the empire. When Severus dies in 211, the empire is stable. But that stability rests on a new, fragile balance. Rome is ruled by the army, not the other way around. When Severus dies in 211, power passes to his 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta. The arrangement lasts only briefly. In December of that same year, Geta is killed inside the imperial palace during a meeting their mother, Julia Domna, tries to mediate. Soldiers loyal to Caracalla burst into the room and kill him before his eyes. The empire is left with a single emperor again. Caracalla inherits a state that depends more and more on the army. His response is straightforward. He courts the legions, lives with them, and pays well. Soldiers' pay rises by about a third, strengthening loyalty, but worsening pressure on imperial finances. Keeping hundreds of thousands of men under arms only gets more expensive especially in an empire that no longer expands. In 212, Caracalla issues the Constitutio Annotiniana, extending Roman citizenship to almost all free men in the empire. It isn't ideological. It's an administrative measure that broadens the state's tax base to sustain an ever more expensive imperial system. In 215, another signal appears. The Annotinianus is introduced, a new silver coin with a face value higher than the denarius, but a lower silver content. It's a short-term fix. It pays soldiers and suppliers, yet it also shows how fragile the state's finances are becoming. In 217, Caracalla is assassinated during a campaign in the east. Macrinus replaces him, the first emperor not from the senatorial order, but from the equestrian order, the class of officials and commanders in the imperial machine. He reigns just over a year. Power changes hands again, quickly. The stability built by Severus still holds, but now starts to creak. In 218, after Macrinus falls, the empire passes to Elagabalus. The change at the top is swift, but the problem isn't the emperor's personality. It's the world he has to govern. In the east, the situation is changing drastically. Between 224 and 226, in Persia, the Parthian dynasty is overthrown by Ardashir I, founder of the Sasanian dynasty. A more centralized, more aggressive state emerges, openly claiming the lands of the Achaemenid Empire, including Roman Mesopotamia. For the first time in centuries, Rome faces an eastern opponent able to mobilize comparable resources and plan large-scale wars on a scale Rome had never faced before. When Severus Alexander takes power in 222, the east is already the decisive front. The new emperor tries to restore order and reassert control, but he has to do it in a profoundly changed context. Between 231 and 233, Rome wages a major campaign against the Sasanians, with headquarters in Syria and operations across Mesopotamia. It's a complex war, fought far from Rome, requiring long supply lines and difficult coordination among multiple armies. The results are uncertain. No disaster, but no clear victory. In Rome, however, it is presented as a success. Strategically, the empire holds. Politically, the problem is different. Troops judge an emperor by results, not by logistical difficulties or structural constraints, and they punish failure quickly, with anger, mistrust, and revolt. When the Eastern campaign ends, the empire has to shift attention again. In the north, along the Rhine, pressure from Germanic peoples rises, especially in Upper Germany, where raids and tensions make the border unstable. The frontier begins to fray. This time, the army is not prepared to wait. The power system built by Septimus Severus is about to face its hardest test yet. In 234, after returning from the Eastern campaign, Severus Alexander has to make an immediate decision on the Rhine frontier. The legions in Upper Germany demand a hard military response to Germanic raids, an offensive campaign, booty, and border security. Instead, the emperor chooses a different line. He tries to contain the situation through negotiations and payments to avoid a long, costly war that would bleed the provinces. Strategically, it makes sense. For soldiers, it is unacceptable. Here, the system's structural weakness becomes visible. Troops are now used to measuring the emperor by immediate results: victory, booty, and donatives paid out on the spot. On the Rhine, no option is neutral. War costs. Compromise looks like weakness. Delay looks like incompetence. Trust collapses in a matter of weeks. In March 235, In a camp near Mogontiacum, today's Mainz, Severus Alexander and his mother, Julia Mamamia, are killed by soldiers. There is no trial and no formal political decision. It's a military revolt out in the open. In their place, the army acclaims Maximinus Thrax, a commander of provincial origin with no ties to the Senate or Rome's aristocracy. He owes everything to his military career and the troops' favor. Maximinus will never set foot in Rome. The shift is clear. For the first time, and openly, the emperor is chosen directly from the barracks, without institutional mediation. This isn't an isolated coup. It's the sign that the rules of the game have changed. Here, the crisis of the 3rd century begins, not because Rome collapses, but because imperial power becomes structurally unstable. From this moment on, imperial authority becomes inseparable from the consent of the army itself. Beginning in 235 AD, the Roman Empire enters the age of the Barraks Emperors, men made emperor not in Rome, but by soldiers in distant frontier camps. Between AD 235 and 259, the imperial title is seized more than a dozen times, not in Rome, but on the Rhine and the Danube in Africa, and in the east in front of assembled troops. Some reign for years. Others last only weeks. Many are killed by the very soldiers who just hailed them. One of them is only 13. The pattern repeats, simple and brutal. An army removes the sitting emperor, proclaims its commander, and presents the rest of the empire with a done deal. These aren't isolated coups. This is a system, one that produces emperors and usurpers in rapid succession. Who survives this spiral? Can Rome find stability again, and at what price? In March 235, on the Rhine frontier near Mogontiacum, today's Mainz, Emperor Severus Alexander is killed by his own soldiers, along with his mother, Julia Mamamia. In the same camp, the legions proclaim Maximinus Thrax emperor. The succession happens without formal institutions, without consultation with Rome, without political mediation. Power changes hands in the field by acclamation, by the army's decision. Maximinus controls one of the largest concentrations of troops in the empire. In Upper Germany, between the Rhine and the Danube, he commands more than 60,000 soldiers, roughly a fifth of Rome's entire army, under a single leader. That's what makes his elevation instantly credible. When the news reaches Rome, the Senate has no real alternative. Without an army of its own, it accepts the choice the troops have made. It recognizes Maximinus, but distrusts him deeply, and in 238 declares him a public enemy. From that point on, the center of power shifts to the frontier. Between 235 and 236, Maximinus stays with the army and rules from the borderlands. He campaigns against the Alemanni, the Chatti, and other Germanic tribes on the Rhine, basing his legitimacy on one principle: as long as the army fights and gets paid, the emperor survives. He seeks no approval in Rome and strikes no bargains with the aristocracy. With no political base in the capital, Maximinus has only one source of legitimacy: the army's loyalty. Keeping it requires regular pay, donatives, and constant campaigning, and that demands money now. So he increases the tax burden on some of the empire's richest provinces: proconsular Africa, Asia, and Achaia, far from the frontier, but essential to state revenue. In Rome, the emperor seems increasingly distant. On the frontier, he isn't a politician at all. He's a commander, leading men and handing out rewards. In 238, the entire system explodes into view, suddenly visible, simultaneous, and uncontrollable. Opposition to Maximinus breaks out far from the Rhine, in one of Rome's richest provinces, proconsular Africa. The revolt begins at Thysdrus, then quickly spreads to Carthage. Local elites, squeezed by tax pressure, proclaim Gordian I and Gordian II co-emperors, not out of ideology, but out of necessity. The father, elderly and respected, brings senatorial legitimacy. The son provides continuity. It's an attempt to present the Senate with a ready-made government before Maximinus can react. But the African revolt collapses within weeks. Capelianus, governor of Numidia and commander of Legio III Augusta, remains loyal to Maximinus and marches on Carthage. Gordian II dies in the first clash. When the news reaches him, Gordian I takes his own life. In Rome, the Senate intervenes directly. Realizing Maximinus can no longer be ignored or removed by traditional politics, it appoints two Augusti, Pupienus and Balbinus, in a last-ditch attempt to set the authority of the capital against the power of the frontier armies. Under pressure from the streets, it also accepts the very young Gordian III as Caesar. Maximinus responds the only way he knows how, with the army. He marches into Italy and lays siege to Aquileia, the gateway to the peninsula. But here, the machine jams. The siege drags on. Supplies thin out. Confidence wavers. In the spring, Maximinus and his son are killed by their own soldiers in camp. Their bodies are beheaded, and the heads are sent to Rome as proof the regime is over. A brutal gesture, but politically unmistakable. Back in Rome, the power-sharing arrangement between Pupienus and Balbinus collapses within weeks. The two men distrust each other and paralyze the government. The Praetorian Guard, hostile to the Senate and never truly loyal to either emperor, exploits the split. The guards seize them, drag them away, torture them, and kill them. Their mutilated bodies are displayed in public as a message. In Rome, power belongs to whoever controls the weapons. With the Praetorians and the crowd behind him, the Senate proclaims Gordian III emperor, the grandson of Gordian I, and the last remaining piece of the Gordian faction. Gordian III is only 13, and that is precisely why he becomes a compromise. He suits the Senate because he commands no personal army. He suits the Praetorians because he can be controlled. And he suits the frontier commanders because he poses no immediate threat to any of them. He isn't chosen for strength, but because at that moment, no one has a real incentive to remove him. In just a few months, the empire has seen 6 emperors rise, and none has managed to build a stable government. By late 241, Gordian III leaves Rome and heads east. It isn't a political choice, it's a military necessity. In Syria, along the Euphrates, and in Mesopotamia, the young emperor's credibility will be tested. The headquarters shifts to Antioch, the logistical hub of the Eastern Empire. From there, operations begin against the Sasanian realm of Shapur I, an aggressive opponent able to strike deep into Roman territory. Gordian doesn't direct the campaign himself. He stays at the front as a political guarantee, a visible emperor for the troops and for the Senate. Real command lies with the Praetorian prefect Timotheus, Gordian's father-in-law and the key figure driving the war effort. Once again, the empire is governed through delegation. In 243, the Roman army wins a significant victory at Rassena in Mesopotamia. It matters, but it doesn't stabilize the frontier or remove the Sasanian threat. The distances remain vast, supply lines fragile, and the balance still precarious. In 244, after Timotheus dies, Gordian III dies as well, during a withdrawal along the Euphrates in disputed circumstances. Sources disagree on the details, but the political effect is immediate. Philip the Arab, now Praetorian prefect and the key figure in the chain of command, is proclaimed emperor by the troops. The frontier cannot be left without a leader. There's no time for a power vacuum. In wartime, succession has to be immediate. In 244, Philip the Arab returns from the frontier to Rome and tries to restore order at home. In 248, Rome celebrates its 1000th anniversary. It's propaganda in its purest form: games, ceremonies, and above all, commemorative coins, messages meant to project continuity and control. But on the frontiers, the reality is the opposite: emergencies, raids, and constant reaction. In those same years, usurpers appear on the Danube and in the east: Pacatianus and Iotapianus. Hailed by local armies, their rule is brief. They last weeks, and they are removed by the same troops that raised them. The system is already slipping out of control. In 249, Philip sends Decius to restore order on the Danube. Yet it is there that the army acclaims Decius instead. Decius marches on Italy and defeats Philip near Verona. The new emperor tries to hold the state together through discipline. In 250, Decius orders public sacrifices to the traditional gods. It wasn't aimed at one group alone. It was meant as a public test of loyalty inside a crisis-stricken empire. In Egypt, papyri preserve the libelli, written certificates proving that a citizen had performed the sacrifice when officials demanded proof. But the frontier sets the pace. Between 250 and 251, large Gothic groups cross the lower Danube. In 251, at Arbritus in Lower Moesia, the Roman army suffers a disaster. Decius and his son Herennius Etruscus die. It is one of the rare cases of an emperor falling in battle against an external army, a massive political and psychological blow. After Decius dies at Abritus, troops along the lower Danube and Moesia proclaim Trebonius Gallus emperor. In Rome, however, Hostilian, Decius' son, remains. He had already been named Caesar and is now associated with power, probably as Augustus, to preserve dynastic continuity and calm the Senate. A few months later, Hostilian dies in Rome, likely from the plague. His death removes the last direct representative of Decius' dynasty and leaves Trebonianus Gallus as sole emperor. Gallus then elevates his own son, Volusian, as co-ruler. The regime remains fragile. In 253, Commander Alemannius, acclaimed emperor by the troops after a victory over the Goths on the Danube, marches into Italy. As he advances, Gallus' own soldiers kill Gallus and Volusian before the armies even meet, and switch to Aemilianus' side. But Aemilianus' power is short-lived. Valerian advances from the west, already proclaimed emperor by his troops in the Rhine-Danube regions. When it becomes clear that Valerian's army is larger and better organized, Aemilianus' soldiers abandon him, kill him, and proclaim Valerian emperor before a decisive clash. Behind all of this, another factor magnifies the crisis: the so-called Plague of Cyprian. Some sources speak of thousands dying each day in Rome for weeks at a time, and many historians argue the demographic impact was devastating, possibly over 10% of the population in parts of the empire. 253 shows one thing clearly: with multiple fronts and overlapping crises, the throne changes hands at the speed of events themselves. By late 253, power looks consolidated again, but only on the surface. Valerian is recognized as emperor by the Western armies and quickly elevates his son Galenius as co-emperor. 2 Augusti. It's a rational division of labor, not a guarantee of stability. Valerian takes the east, Galenius remains in the west. In the west, Galenius must hold a long, porous frontier. Pressure from Germanic peoples is constant on the Rhine. Instability on the Danube does not end after Abritus. Every troop movement solves one emergency and creates another. Reinforce one sector and you weaken the next. It's a balance maintained only through rapid interventions over and over. In the east, Valerian shifts his headquarters to Syria using Antioch as his hub and focuses on the Euphrates corridor. His opponent is Shapur I. After years of raids and campaigning, the frontier now demands the emperor's personal presence and massive resources. Meanwhile, proclamations on the Danube do not stop. Between 258 and 259, the death of the young Valerian II, named Caesar by his father Galenius, and tensions in the Balkan provinces fuel new local claimants. Figures like Angeninus and Regiolanus rise briefly and are eliminated, but they reveal how fragile the chain of command has become. By late 259, the 2 Augusti are still standing, but they have not solved the underlying problem. They have only split the crisis across 2 fronts. By late 259, the decisive front is in the east. Valerian concentrates his forces in Syria, with Antioch as his base, and pushes along the Euphrates toward Roman Mesopotamia. The goal is to stop Shapur I before Persian pressure turns frontier cities into breaking points. Distances are immense, supply lines fragile, and the army already carries years of campaigning. Losses, exhaustion, disease. Every option is risky. Advance and you expose yourself. Halt and you concede the initiative. Negotiate openly and the troops may read it as weakness. In early 260, Valerian reaches the region around Edessa and Osroene with an army that has to act fast. And Rome is about to learn just how vulnerable an emperor can be when war closes in. Early in AD 260, near Edessa in Osroene, the Roman Empire gathers one of the last major field armies it can still assemble in the east. Emperor Valerian is there with tens of thousands of men. Some estimates put the force near 70,000, concentrated along the main route between Syria and Mesopotamia. It's a formidable army, but it's already worn down. Months of marching along the middle Euphrates have taken their toll, and everything depends on a supply line stretching hundreds of miles. Worse, an epidemic tears through the camps, often associated with the plague of Cyprian, killing without battle, not only soldiers, but also pack animals and the workers who keep the convoys moving. Day by day, the army thins. Facing them is Shapur I and the Sasanian army, more maneuverable, with heavy cavalry and horse archers able to strike fast at the enemy's weak points. Edessa isn't an imperial capital, it's a hinge point. If it falls, Persian pressure rolls straight into Syria. If it holds, Rome's eastern defenses stay connected. And here, something happens that had never happened before in Roman history. Valerian, a reigning Augustus, is taken alive and held prisoner by a foreign enemy. He isn't killed in battle. He isn't overthrown by his men. He isn't assassinated in Rome. Nothing like it will happen again to a reigning emperor of imperial Rome. How was it possible? And what happened next? By late 259, The Eastern Front isn't just another border. It's where Rome risks losing nearly 6 decades of hard-won ground beyond the Euphrates. Since the days of Septimus Severus, the empire hasn't merely guarded the river. It has built a bridgehead in Mesopotamia, anchored by fortress cities like Nisblis, Sangara, and Carrhae. Even Osroene, once a client kingdom, has only recently been turned into a Roman province. It's a recent conquest, fragile and never fully absorbed. The heart of the system is Antioch on the Orontes, not a minor provincial capital, but a metropolis of hundreds of thousands, one of the empire's great cities and the seat of Eastern military command. Men, money, and grain converge here. From Antioch, orders and supplies move along the main Euphrates supply route. If Antioch holds, the East holds. If the logistical chain linking Antioch to Mesopotamia breaks, the defense collapses. On the ground, 6 or 7 legions operate, around 30,000 to 35,000 legionnaires, supported by at least as many auxiliaries, Syrian archers, cavalry, and light infantry. Units like Legio III Gallica, veterans of Eastern warfare, are among them, along with the so-called Parthian legions stationed beyond the river. River flotillas and transport craft on the Euphrates help move men and supplies, but they aren't enough on their own to stop a major Persian offensive. And Edessa sits near the center of it all, a key crossroads roughly 185 miles from Antioch, where the Roman world meets the interior of Mesopotamia. Shapur is targeting this entire structure. Valerian understands the logic. If he doesn't stop the Persians along the Antioch-Euphrates-Osroene route, the frontier cities become weak links. Strategically, he has no choice. Valerian moves because the warning signs in the east have been building for years. Sasanian offensives have already struck deep. Antioch itself has been threatened and even sacked. Then, in 259, reports come in of new pressure on the fortress belt of Mesopotamia and Osroene. If the enemy breaks into the corridor between the Euphrates and the uplands, the frontier won't hold. Valerian's goal is straightforward: concentrate an army, protect the major Euphrates crossings, and keep Shapur from choosing the time and place of battle at will. The line he has to defend runs from Syria to the river crossings, fords and pontoon bridges around places like Zuguma and Samosata, then bends northeast towards Osroene and Edessa. This is where war becomes logistics. Even without a precise headcount, we're talking about tens of thousands of men. Each soldier needs roughly 2 pounds of grain a day. Multiply that across an army of 50,000, and you're moving something like 50 tons of grain every single day. And that's before you feed the horses and pack animals. You won't carry weeks' worth of supplies on wagons. You depend on depots, requisitioning, and towns along the route. If one link fails, the army slows. And a slow army on this front is a vulnerable army. The sources don't let us reconstruct every step of the march, but one thing is clear: disease is eating into the force. In these same years, the empire is hit by the epidemic known as the Plague of Cyprian, and it very likely affects Valerian's army as well. Fevers thin the ranks, sap strength, and slow movement. Under those conditions, the Roman army marches toward its showdown. When Valerian enters Edessa in 260, he faces Shapur I, the ruler who has turned the Sasanians into a true imperial power. Shapur follows Ardashir I, founder of the dynasty, first as co-ruler around 240, then as sole king from 242. By 260, he has been on the throne for close to 2 decades. His ambition is clear: secure Sasanian Mesopotamia and press the frontier west, claiming the title King of Kings. not just over Iran, but over conquered lands as well. Rome has already paid for that strategy. In earlier years, Shapur inflicted major defeats along the Euphrates, at places like Barbalissos, and struck important cities, including Antioch itself, deep inside Syria. In 256, Dira Europos falls, not just a fortress lost, but proof that Rome's system on the Middle Euphrates can be broken. Edessa, in Osroene, is where Valerian tries to halt the Sasanian advance, at the edge of Rome's Mesopotamian bridgehead. The sources don't all agree on the decisive moment. Some describe a battle lost, others negotiations that went badly. But the outcome is certain. Valerian is captured alive and taken into captivity along with members of his staff. Shapur makes the moment public. He boasts of it in a celebratory inscription and immortalizes it in monumental art. The king on horseback, the Roman emperor helpless. The consequences are immediate. The Eastern Command is suddenly leaderless. The war goes on, but for the first time in Roman history, a reigning emperor cannot lead it because he is the enemy's prisoner. After Edessa, Valerian doesn't disappear. He is alive, but he is in the enemy's hands. Shapur takes him deep into Sasanian territory as a political trophy, proclaimed in inscriptions and depicted in monumental art. Along with the emperor, thousands of Romans, soldiers, technicians, and craftsmen are deported and used as forced labor. For Shapur, Edessa isn't only a battlefield victory. It's also a capture of manpower and expertise. That's why the blow is so devastating for Rome. It loses an emperor, an army, and critical skills all at once. In the West, Gallienus remains in power, but he can't simply march east to replace his father. Between northern Italy, the Rhine, and the Danube, the frontiers are stretched to the breaking point. In that vacuum, a new power emerges on the Rhine. In Lower Germany, the troops proclaim Postumus. The spark is a clash with Germanic raiders and a dispute over loot claimed by Caesar Salinius and his circle at Colonia Agrippina. The soldiers answer in the usual way. They choose a commander in the field. Postumus marches on Cologne. Salonius is killed. Within weeks, Gaul and long stretches of the Rhine frontier fall under a separate authority, one that works because it pays, defends, and decides on the spot. In the east, the vacuum produces another emergency regime. Macrianus and his sons emerge between Syria and Asia Minor, trying to return crisis command into a rival imperial alternative. It's fragile. One son, Quietus, stays in Syria. The other, along with Macrianus himself, tries to push west. But the response comes from the people who actually control the ground. And that is where Odeanathus of Palmyra steps in. Palmyra, an oasis city between inland Syria and the Euphrates, has cavalry, wealth, and local networks. Odeanathus drives the Persians back, crushes the eastern usurpation, and for now, becomes the backbone of Rome's defense in the east, pushing deep into Mesopotamia. From 262 onward, the empire's fragmentation hardens. On the Rhine, Postumus doesn't behave like a barbarian invader. He builds a breakaway Roman state using Roman tools. He rules from cities like Colonia Agrippina and, above all, Augusta Treverorum, Trier. He holds the frontier, mints coins, and builds his own administration. The choice is brutal but practical. He doesn't march on Rome because his legitimacy comes from the frontier and from pay. As long as he defends Gaul and the Rhine, his men follow. In the east, Odenathus does what Rome can no longer do directly. After settling accounts with Marcianus and his sons, he carries the war beyond the Euphrates. Between 262 and 263, he pushes forward and reaches the vicinity of Ctesiphon, enough to reverse the Sasanian momentum and turn Palmyra into the linchpin of Rome's defense in the east. Between those two poles stands Gallienus, facing a different problem: keeping Italy intact while the mobile frontiers consume resources. His focus shifts more on northern Italy, because from there he can react fast, whether the next emergency is a raid on the Rhine or a crisis on the Danube. In these years, Rome increasingly relies on a mobile reserve, especially cavalry that can race to whichever border is breaking. But the pressure doesn't cease. The Danube keeps producing emergencies, and the eastern Mediterranean sees new raids. Then, in 268, instability reaches the heart of the system. General Aureolus, one of the most important commanders in Gallienus's war machine, rebels in northern Italy. Gallienus lays siege to him at Mediolanum, and there, in camp, the emperor is assassinated. The lesson is grim. Once the empire splits into rival power centers, even Italy becomes a battlefield. And when Gallienus falls, who deserves power? Who can seize it without losing the Rhine, the Danube, and the East in the same year? In 268, after Gallienus is killed during the siege of Mediolanum, Danubian troops in northern Italy proclaim Claudius II emperor. The first priority is to end the civil conflict. Aureolus, barricaded in Milan, surrenders and is executed. But Claudius can't stay in Italy. The real crisis is already back on the Danube. In 269, the biggest threat of this phase arrives. A large Gothic and Scythian coalition pushes towards the Balkans, partly over land and partly by sea, from the Black Sea into the Aegean. Ancient sources give enormous numbers, almost certainly exaggerated. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of men.
Onward to Thrace! Let the Romans tremble!
What matters is the outcome. Thrace and Macedonia are overrun. Cities like Thessalonica are threatened, and Rome has to decide where to concentrate its forces. Claudius marches into Moesia. The decisive clash takes place near Naissus, today's Nice, along the route that links the lower Danube to the Balkan interior. The Roman victory is major and costly. The Gothic groups are shattered, but the aftermath creates a problem Rome struggles to manage. Survivors scatter, and huge numbers of prisoners and refugees keep moving through the region in search of food. Claudius earns the title Gothicus, but the empire doesn't regain stability. The crisis accelerates. In 270, Claudius dies, likely in the same epidemic climate. Quintillus is briefly recognized in Rome, but the Danube army chooses Aurelian. Within weeks, Quintillus is left without troops. Some sources say his soldiers kill him, others say he commits suicide. Either way, it's over almost immediately. The point isn't a twist, it's the rule. In an empire fighting on multiple fronts, succession doesn't wait for Rome. It's decided where the armies are. In AD 270, the Roman Empire is effectively split three ways. In the east, for the first time since Cleopatra, power isn't held by a Roman emperor, nor by a barracks general. It's in a woman's hands. In Palmyra, between Syria and the routes to the Euphrates, after Odenathus is murdered, command doesn't pass to a Roman officer. It passes to Zenobia, his wife. regent for her son Vabalithus, but ruler in practice. She isn't a makeshift usurper, a warrior queen who commands armies, takes territory, and challenges imperial authority, at times even claiming the title Augusta. Zenobia is also highly educated. She speaks several languages with ease, moves comfortably between Greek, Roman, and Eastern cultures, and, tradition says, even writes a treatise on Cleopatra, presenting herself as her ideal heir. Not vanity, politics. It's her way of claiming Palmyra is not merely a rebel province, but a world capable of ruling itself. While Aurelian struggles to stabilize Italy and the Danube, Palmyra starts making decisions for Syria, for Arabia, and then for an enormous prize: Egypt, Alexandria, grain, and the mint. Will Rome realize it has already lost in the East? Will Aurelian rise to Zenobia's challenge? To see how Zenobia can take command of Rome's eastern world, we have to go back to Palmyra around AD 267. After the shock of Edessa and years of emergency, the man holding the eastern front together is Odenathus, not a Roman emperor, but the local linchpin who coordinates defense and drives back Persian pressure, pushing as far as the gates of Ctesiphon. Then, suddenly, that linchpin disappears. Odenathus is murdered in Syria, along with an older son, in what sources describe as a court conspiracy. Some put it at a banquet, others name Maeonius as the killer, or the beneficiary. The details differ, but the effect is the same. In an instant, the East loses its on-the-ground coordinator. And in that vacuum, Zenobia, Odenathus' wife, steps forward. This is an internal transition, not a revolt. She takes control as regent for her son Vabalithus, still too young to rule. The move prevents internal fragmentation and preserves the formal order. It keeps taxes flowing and the chain of command intact, at least on paper. And Rome can't simply send a general to replace Palmyra. With Italy, the Danube, and Western crises, the imperial center lacks the ability to garrison Syria. By necessity, it accepts what works. But why can Palmyra carry this weight? Because it isn't a fringe outpost, it's a geographic hinge point. It sits between inland Syria and the routes to the Euphrates, close enough to major cities to intervene within days, yet far enough out to control the desert roads. The numbers make the map clear. Palmyra lies about 140 miles from Damascus and about 170 miles from Antioch along the main Syrian route. Toward the Euphrates, it's a little over 125 miles. It isn't an isolated city, it's a hub linking towns, fords, tracks, and supplies. Palmyra lives off transit. Its wealth depends on trade routes. It controls no port and no great river. It governs the traffic that crosses the desert and flows toward Emesa, Damascus, Antioch, and then the coast. And this isn't just legend. A customs tariff carved in stone, the Palmyrene tariff, dated to AD 137, shows a city accustomed to measuring, taxing, and regulating trade. It's a snapshot of a working fiscal system. In a world where a caravan convoy can cover about 16 to 19 miles a day, controlling a hub like this means controlling time. Who passes, when, and how much gets paid. That revenue pays for the most important part of power: armed men and equipment. That's where real authority lies. And in the desert, mobility and mounted units matter more than sheer numbers. Heavy cavalry, archers, and local networks that can protect the routes and strike quickly wherever the frontier shifts. Zenobia moves in this reality with one decisive advantage. She doesn't look like an outsider. Her dynasty adopts Roman forms and names: Septimia, and governs with recognizable tools: city administration, titles, institutional continuity. It looks Roman enough to be accepted publicly, but the substance remains local. Guarantee security, keep urban cities loyal, and keep money and supplies moving. So without spectacular proclamations, a new center of power takes shape between Palmyra, Emesa, and Antioch, an east that formerly speaks in Rome's name, but increasingly answers to whoever is on the ground and in control. And it's on this new normal, before the great conquests, that the Queen of Palmyra takes the next step. Zenobia no longer merely guards the frontier. She begins taking provinces in broad daylight, provinces that aren't periphery at all, but the empire's economic heart. Around AD 271, the kingdom of Palmyra makes a decisive leap. It no longer limits itself to controlling Syria, but annexes Egypt as well, a province that is not a frontier, but the empire's economic center. This is no sudden windfall. It is a deliberate strategic choice. The line of advance is straightforward. From Syria, the Palmyrene force moves south, crosses Palestine, passes through the Sinai, and reaches the Nile Delta, aiming at Alexandria. It isn't a vast mass. The latest estimates suggest roughly 10,000 to 20,000 men, a picked force made up mostly of Palmyrene heavy cavalry, archers, and mobile eastern units. It's an army built to move fast, not to besiege city after city. Zenobia stands at the center of the decision. Sources depict her as involved in military choices, and tradition places her on the scene at least in the operation's crucial phases. She pays the troops, keeps discipline, and guarantees continuity of command. In an age absent of emperors, presence in the field gives her power enormous legitimacy. The Roman prefect of Egypt, Tanaggio Probus, tries to react, but the imbalance isn't only numerical, it's structural. Probus has no large field army concentrated in one place. In Egypt, forces are traditionally limited. Legionary detachments, auxiliary troops, and urban garrisons for a total of 5,000 to 10,000 men scattered along the Nile, across the Delta, and in the cities. He has to defend a vast territory while the enemy advances as a single column. The outcome is swift. Probus is defeated and dies. Sources disagree on how, but not the result. This is not a siege campaign. Once the prefect falls, some estimates suggest 80 to 90% of the cities involved go over to Palmyra without fighting. Taking Alexandria means the harbor, the mint, and above all, control of a crucial share of revenue and the grain that feeds Mediterranean cities. With Alexandria in its hands, Palmyra becomes a major economic power in the region. And in Egypt, there's a clear paper trail of the transfer of authority. In papyri, in administrative formulas, in official headings, and in dating systems. These documents tell us Egypt has changed masters. One figure captures the scale of the blow. Antioch and Alexandria lie about 500 miles apart as the crow flies. This isn't a province Rome can retake in a few weeks. That distance multiplies time, cost, and risk just when the empire has no margin to maneuver. With Alexandria taken, Zenobia faces a new problem. Syria and Egypt are two separate pieces. If someone cuts the strip between Palestine and the Sinai, Egypt is isolated. That's why, between 270 and 271, Palmyra focuses on securing territorial continuity. It has to be stitched together, or it breaks. To the south, Palmyrene columns consolidate Arabia along the routes that run from inland Syria down to Bostra, capital of Roman Arabia. That node matters for more than symbolism. It controls roads, toll points, and the passages between Syria and Roman Palestine. Holding Bostra and the caravan roads locks down the line linking Damascus and the Orontes Basin to the corridor leading toward Egypt. But the real strategic leap is to the north. From Syria, access to Asia Minor runs through Cilicia, a coastal plain that ends against the wall of the Taurus Mountains. The passes are few and unavoidable. The Cilician gates, and whoever controls them decides who can climb onto the Anatolian plateau and who stays trapped to the south. Palmyra pushes beyond Syria, seizing the passes and choke points that keep the road open between Antioch and Inner Anatolia. And if Palmyra holds the Taurus gateway, any reconquest becomes costly. To enter Syria, you have to pass where Palmyra can shut the door. And when a power controls roads and passes, it can start calling itself an empire. After Egypt and the corridors into Anatolia, Zenobia understands the contest isn't fought only with armies and mountain passes. It's fought with something even more dangerous: legitimacy. For months, Palmyra stays in a gray zone. It effectively rules Syria, Arabia, and Egypt, yet can still present it all as management in the empire's name, a local power needed because Rome is not present. Then comes the turning point, not with a speech, but with titles. In official language, Babalathus, her son, rises step by step, from Rex to Imperator, and finally to Augustus. It's a way of bringing him, piece by piece, into the imperial rank itself. Alongside him appears Zenobia. On some coin issues and in official presentations, she is described as Augusta, a choice historians place between late 271 and 272 with disputed chronology, but with a meaning that is unmistakable. Here, the image of the second Cleopatra is born. Whether the lineage is true matters less than the message. After Egypt, invoking Cleopatra means saying this: Alexandria is not an occupied province, but a legitimate throne, and the East is no longer a loyal periphery, but a world capable of naming its own center of power. The break doesn't come with the proclamation. On Alexandrian coinage and in other official formulas, Babalathus takes the titles Imperator and Augustus and is paired with Zenobia as co-Augusta. Augustus isn't decorative. It's the Roman imperial title above all others. From this moment, Babalathus is no longer an extraordinary governor, but an alternative emperor, and Rome can no longer pretend nothing is happening. Aurelian comes to power in 270 and finds not just an empire in trouble, but one already distorted by crisis. In the West, he has to prevent collapse, frontiers, armies, legitimacy, because if the West gives way, Rome is no longer a credible capital. But while Aurelian stabilizes the Western emergency, in the East, the problem is now structural. A bloc controls Syria and Egypt, and above all, the corridors that link them to Anatolia through the Taurus passes. This is not a revolt. It is administration. It collects taxes, pays troops, assigns offices, and above all, it governs. This is the point of no return. If Rome waits any longer, it loses not only provinces, but the ability to decide in the East. Every month that goes by makes that system more stable and more accepted in the eyes of everyone. Aurelian understands it. In 272, he stops waiting. This rift cannot be mended with letters or compromises. The Roman army moves east in a full-scale campaign, It goes to confront a state that is already functioning with everything that entails. If you found this episode helpful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. In the next video, we'll follow Aurelian east into the clash with Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire. This is the moment Rome almost split in two. In 272 AD, the entire Eastern Empire answers to one woman, Zenobia. Not as rebel, not as governor, as ruler. She mints coins like an empress, commands armies like a sovereign, controls the richest trade routes in the Roman world. When Aurelian marches east, he has one problem. He can't afford a long war, because every day she rules makes her empire feel permanent. So here's the real question. How do you destroy a rival empire that actually works? Why does it collapse in a matter of months? In 272, Aurelian opens the Eastern campaign under one strict constraint: time. He can't afford months of sieges or a war of attrition. Every city that holds out slows the advance. Every week lost makes Palmyrene rule feel more stable, more accepted. The strategy is forced. Win a chain of surrenders, not just single victories. Aurelian doesn't move a giant army, but a mobile force of tens of thousands, on the order of 30,000 to 40,000, built to march and strike in sequence. Alongside infantry, cavalry plays a decisive role, strengthened in the previous years precisely to respond quickly to crises on multiple fronts. It's an army designed to arrive first, not to sit before walls and wait for engineers to break them. The march makes it obvious. From the Balkans and Thrace, the army crosses the Bosporus and pours into Asia Minor. Here, distance matters more than numbers. Cities are separated by days of marching, and road junctions set the campaign's tempo. An army on campaign averages about 9 to 12 miles a day. Crossing Anatolia takes 4 to 6 weeks, not a few days. Lose time, and you can lose the war before you ever reach Syria. There is another factor, less visible but decisive. In a world without telegraph wires, couriers and merchants carry news, and sometimes it arrives days before the imperial standards. Sources portray Aurelian as a harsh commander, relentless about discipline. He's known for punishing indiscipline and treason brutally, but also for rewarding quick surrender. His reputation runs ahead of the army. When he appears before a city's walls, the question becomes practical. Is it really worth resisting when clemency is offered for surrender? That is how the Eastern campaign takes shape. Not as the classic Roman clash of opposing legions, but as a race against time, where every open gate matters more than a battle won on paper. In the spring of 272, when Aurelian enters Anatolia, the war takes on a completely different shape. Palmyra loses ground not because it's crushed in a series of battles, but because Asia Minor's city network shifts. Many cities open their gates. Some resist, but the dominant effect is surrender as a calculation. Each open gate means days, sometimes weeks, saved, and above all, lives spared on both sides. Anatolia isn't a compact frontier. It's a mosaic of plateaus, valleys, and road junctions. Regions like Cappadocia and Galatia matter because they connect the key corridors into Syria. Whoever controls these junctions gains a major strategic and logistical advantage. It's in this context that late antique sources recount a famous episode. Tyana, a city of about 25,000 inhabitants, not a minor place, but a substantial urban center in Inner Anatolia. After taking the city, Aurelian reportedly chose to spare it, foregoing plunder and exemplary punishment. Sources tell the story differently, yet the strategic meaning is clear. A spared city sends a far more powerful message than a destroyed one to every town ahead. Clemency here isn't kindness, it's a strategic shortcut. If a city learns that surrender means survival, while resistance risks everything, the choice becomes rational. That is how Anatolia begins to yield, not under legionary blows, but under the weight of time Aurelian refuses to lose before the campaign reaches Syria.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
After Anatolia, Aurelian's army still has one geographic choke point to clear before it reaches the East's core: Sicilia. Once past the Sicilian gates, the only usable passes through the Taurus. The road drops into northern Syria toward the Orontes Valley. Whoever controls this passage decides not only who enters Syria, but also who controls the flow of men, goods, and supplies. From the Sicilian gates to Antioch is about 125 miles, roughly 10 days marching for an army, if nothing stops it en route. Between late spring and early summer 272, the Battle of Emei is fought a short distance from Antioch, the main logistical hub of Rome's east. Aurelian commands an army of several tens of thousands, probably between 30 and 40,000, disciplined infantry supported by mobile cavalry contingents. Opposite him stands the Palmyrene army, led by General Zabdas, comparable in numbers but built differently. Less heavy infantry, more armored cavalry and mounted archers. Fast, hard-hitting, and dangerous on open ground in Syria. The sources don't describe the battle in detail, but the most plausible reconstruction is straightforward. Aurelian avoids a frontal clash. Against powerful cavalry, he aims to wear down their momentum, lure them into repeated pursuits, and break their cohesion. It's a tactical choice that favors control of time and space, not immediate shock alone. The outcome is decisive. Rome's victory opens the road to Antioch, which changes hands within days. With a single battle, Aurelian avoids weeks of sieges and seizes Syria's logistical heart before Zenobia can regroup. At this point, it might seem the war is over. In reality, it has just entered its most difficult phase. After the defeat at Emei and the loss of Antioch, the Palmyrene army doesn't dissolve. Antioch and Emesa are about 125 miles apart. At an army's pace, it is 10 to 14 days, but with reorganization and pursuit, it easily becomes 2 or 3 weeks. Within a few weeks, General Zabdas gathers what remains and falls back south along the Orontes corridor. He chooses Emesa, the last place Palmyra can still attempt a regular battle. Emesa is not a random position. It's the junction linking inland Syria to the desert lines. Beyond Emesa, the war can no longer be fought as a conventional campaign. But Emesa also carries a specific symbolic weight in the 3rd century. From here came a priestly dynasty tied to a local solar cult that only a few decades earlier had turned religious power into imperial power. In 218, a young priest from Emesa, remembered as Elagabalus, was lifted onto Rome's throne by Eastern legions. That precedent still matters in 272. Emesa is a reminder that the East is not a passive periphery, but a land that can produce emperors, armies, and alternative legitimacy. It is now high summer 272. Here, Aurelian gives no time. He pursues, forces contact, and wins a second field victory. The sources don't allow a detailed reconstruction, but the outcome is clear. After Emesa, there is no Palmyrene field army left to meet Rome again. From this moment, the war changes nature. It is no longer a contest between two states fielding comparable armies. It becomes a matter of logistics, distance, and endurance, and there is only one direction: Palmyra. After 2 battles, Zenobia can no longer win in the field. From now on, she can only hold out. After Emesa, the war's direction is fixed. Aurelian marches from Emesa toward Palmyra, crossing land that isn't an ordinary province, but desert. Here, water, distance, and the ability to move men and animals without steady supply lines decide everything. Palmyra exists because it controls passages between Syria and the Euphrates. If the oasis falls, the whole system falls with it. The Roman army reaches the city and lays siege. It is not a siege meant to last months. In an isolated oasis, the difference is made in days and a few weeks. Palmyra is fortified, yet isolated. Late antique sources describe an exchange of letters between Aurelian and Zenobia. He demands surrender, promising clemency. She answers, asserting her rank and right to rule. Beyond the details, the meaning is clear. Not rebel versus emperor, but two sovereignties. It is an exchange, and both sides know what is at stake. When it becomes clear that Palmyra cannot hold long, Zenobia plays her last card. She tries to flee east, aiming for the Euphrates and Persian help. Palmyra lies about 90 to 125 miles from the river. For a mounted escort, it is a sprint of a few days, but in the desert, every hour counts. Zenobia is captured before she can cross it. Palmyra surrenders. Aurelian, for now, does not destroy it. He leaves a reduced garrison, only a few hundred men, enough to control the city, not to withstand a new revolt. Palmyra is spared, Zenobia is alive, and the war seems closed with a relatively mild settlement, for now. But it is only an apparent truce. In 273, a few months after the surrender of 272, the war is not truly over. Palmyra rebels again. Sources differ on details, but the sequence is clear. The Roman detachment left in the city after the 272 surrender is wiped out. This is not a legion deployed in open battle, but a garrison made of detachments and control troops. We're talking hundreds, perhaps over 1,000, killed or scattered during the uprising. The result is stark. Roman authority inside the city is erased almost overnight. In the 3rd century, this is a point of no return. Eliminating a garrison after accepting imperial clemency means there is no longer any path to compromise. When the Second Revolt breaks out, Aurelian has already returned west, between Italy and Gaul. The news forces him to reverse course. It is a return that takes weeks and thousands of miles, enough for time to become a weapon again. From the western provinces, he turns back toward the east, along the empire's arteries, to Syria's heart. But this time, he isn't coming to negotiate. The repression is brutal. The city is sacked, its power structures dismantled, and Palmyra will never again be a regional power able to control routes, tolls, and territory. Aurelian also strikes the regime's intellectual elites. Advisors and court intellectuals, such as Longinus, are executed. The goal is not merely to punish a revolt, but to prevent that system from ever being reborn in Syria. As for Zenobia, after Palmyra's fall, the sources do not give a single ending. They give different endings. Some have her dead soon after the capture, perhaps during the transfer. Others imagine her alive, taken to Rome as an illustrious prisoner, then removed from politics. And in 274, at Aurelian's triumph, the victory becomes propaganda. The sources diverge, and we cannot choose a definitive version because the record is thin and partisan. But in truth, that isn't the point. Whatever her personal fate, Zenobia disappears when the world she built disappears. She is not defeated only as a queen, but as the architect of a system, an East that had learned to govern itself, pay armies, mint coin, and make decisions without Rome for years. When Aurelian destroys Palmyra, he erases more than a city. He erases the idea of an alternative center in the East. That is the deepest legacy of victory. In AD 272, Aurelian retakes Palmyra, deep in Syria. His legions cross Asia Minor, reassert control along the Euphrates, and bring territory stretching all the way to Egypt back under imperial authority. It looks like the empire is knitting itself together, yet the break still isn't sealed. But political unity doesn't guarantee economic stability. In the 3rd century, Rome's problem isn't just defending frontiers, it's getting money accepted everywhere, from the Rhine to the Danube and down to Alexandria's ports. As metal content shrinks and minting surges, coins still circulate, but they lose credibility. Prices rise, pay buys less in real terms, and the whole logistical machine, from Nile grain to supplies for armies on the Danube, grows more fragile with every new issue. What happens when a state can still win wars, but can no longer control the value of its own money? In AD 215, Emperor Caracalla introduces a new coin, the Antoninianus. Officially, it's worth 2 denarii. In practice, it doesn't contain twice the silver. The gap between declared value and real content isn't huge, but it marks a shift in principle. The state is now asking people to accept a face value higher than the metal inside can justify. From Rome, the new coin spreads quickly along the empire's main routes, toward the Rhine, the Danube, and the Euphrates. It doesn't stay in the capital's markets. It reaches army camps and frontier provinces. It's a pragmatic choice. The emperor must pay a growing army and sustain a logistical network stretching thousands of miles in every direction. Taxes arrive slowly. Military needs are immediate. Minting a coin with a higher face value puts more money into circulation quickly, even without increasing silver reserves in the same proportion. Between the 220s and the 240s, this logic hardens into policy. The coin is no longer only a tool of exchange. It becomes a tool for managing emergencies. Every troop movement needs pay, pack animals, transport, and grain on short notice. As pressure rises, so does the temptation to prioritize face value over actual metal content. At first, the gap is almost invisible, but this is where the crack opens. When a coin depends more on trust than on metal, the problem doesn't hit all at once. It grows. And in the 3rd century, that inflation becomes unstable. In AD 235, a new phase begins. Power no longer passes through regular political succession. It is seized and defended by the army. This is the age of emperors proclaimed in the field, often to answer immediate crises without waiting for Rome's approval. And that changes the way money is used. Between 235 and 260, the empire fights on several fronts at once. On the Rhine between Mogontiacum and Cologne, on the middle Danube between Sirmium and Viminesium, and in the east along the Euphrates between Antioch and Edessa. These aren't only military lines, they carry enormous economic and financial costs. Keeping garrisons, moving units, repairing forts, and buying grain and pack animals all demand a constant flow of payments. We're talking hundreds of thousands of men under arms. You don't need to do the math to feel the scale. This is where the system speeds up. Each emperor has to buy time, not ethically, but operationally. He must secure immediate loyalty with donatives, rewards, and back pay. And when the priority is to pay at once, the coin becomes an accelerant. More is minted, faster. Quality drops, and trust begins to thin. One detail is revealing. In these years, minting becomes frantic. It isn't enough that money exists. It must reach where the fighting is. In practice, the mint follows the war. When a front flares up, striking coin near the armies is faster than waiting for shipments from home. The point is that this isn't just about rising prices. Under constant pressure, the state starts losing the ability to impose one monetary standard that is both uniform and credible. Trust among citizens and merchants stops being automatic.
This coin is not valuable, I can't take it.
In AD 260, the shock is not only military or political, it is administrative. At Edessa, Emperor Valerian is captured by the Sasanians. The symbolism is crushing. For the first time, a Roman emperor is taken prisoner by an Eastern enemy. In the West, an autonomous bloc forms almost immediately, covering Gaul, Germany, and Britain, centered between Cologne and Trier. In the East, another power solidifies from Syria to Egypt. And in the middle, the Italy-Balkans axis remains along the Danubian corridor. In the West, monetary flows gravitate around Cologne and Trier. Along the Danube, centers like Sicilia and Sirmium emerge. And in the East, mints like Antioch and Alexandria tie into Mediterranean ports and the trade and supply routes they support. Coin legends keep proclaiming imperial unity, yet markets draw a practical line. Some issues are accepted without hesitation, others with suspicion or at a discount. The result is a circulation that becomes less uniform year after year. Coins no longer share the same metal content, the same weight, or the same credibility. Standards diverge, quality falls, and trust fractures. In these years, coin hoards rise sharply. We find them in Britain, in northern Gaul, along the Rhine, and in Danubian provinces. Caches buried in haste, often near transit routes or military settlements, beside camps and forts. It's a rational response. When the coin used each day loses reliability, people hold back the issues they consider better and spend the inferior ones first whenever they can, as insurance. It's defensive behavior. Protect what holds value and get rid of what might depreciate further.
They are what I have.
The fact that these hoards grow in frontier zones and along transit routes is no accident. Where war and uncertainty are closer to the fighting, trust in money is more fragile, for merchants and soldiers alike. But how does a merchant tell that a coin looks like silver and isn't? In the 3rd century, the Anatinianus often keeps its shine thanks to a thin surface silvering. With use, that layer wears away and the copper underneath shows. A scratch on the edge, or even a light tap, can reveal it. No laboratory is needed, just experience. When more and more coins expose that gap between surface and core, trust collapses. This is where inflation enters daily life. Money keeps circulating, but it no longer means the same thing everywhere. Its value depends more and more on how and where it is actually accepted. Between the 250s and the 270s, the monetary crisis stops being mainly about how and where coins are minted and becomes a daily problem. When money loses power and credibility, the state faces two alternatives. The first is to keep increasing the volume of coinage. It brings immediate liquidity, but it also feeds mistrust. Weaker coinage pushes prices up in markets and in army supply contracts across the provinces, forcing people to pay more and more for the same goods. The second alternative is more concrete. Instead of collecting taxes in cash and then using it to buy what the army needs, the state begins to demand goods and services directly in kind. Provinces must provide grain, oil, wine, pack animals, carts, labor, loading crews, and travel services. It is no longer only about paying a sum. It is about delivering what keeps the military machine alive. This way, the empire shields itself from monetary instability. A shipment of grain keeps its value even if the Anatolianus is debased. A mule stays useful whatever the silver content of a coin. This is where inflation is felt on the ground. Pay may arrive, but it buys less. Suppliers demand more, or demand goods instead. Cities try to protect stores and reserves. Above all, when money becomes unreliable, logistics gets harder at the worst moment, right when armies are moving. An empire runs on continuous flows of men, food, and transport. Inflation slows those flows. They jam, or they are replaced by direct obligations. That is how a monetary crisis becomes a transformation of the state. From the Nile Delta to Alexandria, then across the Mediterranean to Ostia, grain moves hundreds of miles, day after day, before it reaches Rome and Italy. And through the imperial supply network, it ends up sustaining the major military concentrations on the frontiers between the Rhine and Danube. The result is that the empire changes its structure. When money loses reliability, the state can no longer simply buy what it needs on the market. It has to demand it. Contracts and regular payments give way to mandatory deliveries, requisitions, and imposed services. Provinces no longer just sell grain or pack animals, they must provide them. The burden of crisis no longer travels through prices that rise, but through obligations that tighten. Inflation then doesn't just erode purchasing power, it also changes the relationship between state and society, shifting the economy from exchange mediated by coin to one increasingly based on direct imposition. Already present, but now far more systematic. When Aurelian takes power in AD 270, he inherits a divided empire and a weakened currency. He comes from the Danubian region, where legions hold an unstable frontier against constant pressure. From there, he secures northern Italy, then marches east through the Balkans and Asia Minor. But while he reconquers territory, he runs into a less visible, persistent problem. The coin no longer has a standard recognized everywhere across the empire. Aurelian understands that without solid, reliable money, no political center can be truly authoritative. Reform does not mean suddenly enriching the metal, but restoring a clear, recognizable measure. Around AD 274, he attempts a reorganization of the monetary system and tighter control of the mints. The point isn't just technical, it's political. New issues carry a mark declaring a standard, meant to make the coin's content visible and controllable across the empire in every province. The mints become power centers. Rome remains the symbol, but so do hubs like Mediolanum and Sicily in the west, and Antioch and Alexandria in the east. These are the places that decide which coin circulates and on what terms. And in Rome, a revolt breaks out over the management of the mint, a sign that controlling money means controlling power. Aurelian tries to restore order, but one question remains. Can you stabilize the currency if the empire is not yet won? In the next episode, we see how he tries to close the fracture. In AD 271, after more than 3 centuries, a major barbarian army reaches Italy. The Luthungi cross the Alpine passes and descend into the wide Po Valley. Rome is suddenly vulnerable. The frontier is no longer a distant line along the Rhine or the Danube. Now the front line is a few days' march from the capital. A year earlier, in 270, a new emperor had been proclaimed, not in Rome, but along the Danube. Aurelian is no court politician. He's shaped by the frontier, where legions decide directly who rules, and where every hesitation is paid in human lives. But the problem runs deeper than an invasion. In the west, along the Rhine, a separate empire controls Gaul. In the east, Syria has already shown how fragile authority can be. The currency is worth less. The armies demand pay and grain. Reuniting Rome won't mean winning battles alone. It means restoring imperial credibility across a world stretching from the Rhine to the Nile. Aurelian must prove that an empire that looks finished can still be governed. In September AD 270, after Emperor Claudius II dies at Sirmium in Pannonia, probably from the plague, succession opens in uncertainty. Claudius' brother, Quintillus, is proclaimed emperor in Italy, based in Aquileia, and at first wins recognition from part of the army and from the Senate in Rome. But the Danube soon decides. Yet on the Danube, the legions chose another commander, Aurelian. Within weeks, the balance shifts. Quintillus loses military support and dies. Sources say by suicide or killed by his own men before the armies ever meet. Aurelian does not come from the Senate or Rome's aristocracy. He is a commander forged along the Danube, where recent campaigns were fought against Goths and other peoples beyond the river. His authority comes directly from the frontier armies that chose him. In 270, the priority is to stabilize the middle Danube. The river is a continuous contact line. Quick raids, strikes, plunder, then a retreat beyond the frontier. Rome answers by concentrating forces and moving them quickly between hubs like Sirmium and Viminesium, linked by military roads that can shift detachments within days. In this phase, imperial command has to stay mobile at all times. The Danube is also a strategic hinge. From here, Rome can intervene quickly toward northeastern Italy through the Balkan corridor, or pivot east toward Thrace and the Bosporus. It is still the balance point between west and east. But as Aurelian strengthens this line, the empire remains divided. In the west, along the Rhine, the Gallic Empire still stands. In 270, it is led by Victorinus, and in 271, it will pass to Tetrarchus I, with power centered in Cologne and Trier. In the east, Syria lies under Palmyrene influence after Odenathus' campaigns and Zenobia's rise. When Aurelian takes power in 270, he does not inherit one front. He inherits three distinct power blocks: the Danubian belt under his direct control, the west along the Rhine, the Gallic Empire, then led by Victorinus, and the Syrian east, tied to Palmyra. Reunification isn't yet an official goal. The priority is to keep the Danube line from breaking and to stop Italy from becoming the next front. In 271, that danger becomes suddenly real. In AD 271, a Germanic group moving in force, identified in the sources as the Luthungi, breaks into northern Italy. The column crosses the Alpine corridors, leaking the Danubian region to the Italian plain, and heads toward the Via Aemilia corridor, the spine of northern Italy that connects the plains cities and intersects the roads climbing to the passes. This is not a handful of raiders. The fighting core, estimated at 10,000 to 20,000 men, is likely accompanied by wagons, booty, and families, as often happens in incursions of this era. Aurelian is stationed along the Danubian belt between Pannonia and Boeotia. He leaves the Danube line and moves toward Italy as quickly as he can, with mobile units drawn from the frontier army. Sources give no precise figures, but the operation implies a substantial force, likely 20,000 to 30,000 men, combining legionary infantry with a significant share of cavalry, now essential for responding to fast incursions. The first phase is the Germanic penetration. Plunder, then a rapid drive south, meant to hit and withdraw before Roman forces can concentrate. It is a string of raids aimed at booty, not conquest. Speed is their real protection. Aurelian intercepts the invaders at Placentia, near modern Piacenza. The first clash appears to go against the Romans. The speed of the incursion and the dispersion of units make immediate coordination difficult. For a moment, the initiative passes to the Luthungi. The danger is not only military, it is psychological. If northern Italy can be entered, cities farther south begin to fear that nobody can protect them. Roman command reacts by reorganizing its forces and pressing hard along the routes back north. Fighting shifts towards Ticinum, modern Pavia, and along the Ticino River. With retreat lines cut, the Germanic column is gradually driven back over the Alps within weeks before it can fully regroup. Italy is cleared, but the effect endures. For the first time in more than 3 centuries, the empire's heart has been threatened directly. After the northern campaign, Aurelian goes to Rome. In 271, he begins building the Aurelian Walls, a massive new circuit about 12 miles long, raised around the capital. The walls defend not only the monumental center, but a far wider urban area, including suburbs and infrastructure designed for siege conditions. The decision marks a strategic shift. Rome is no longer automatically safe. The lesson is clear. Repelling one incursion isn't enough. If an army can reach the Italian plain in weeks, Italy is no longer a rear area. It is a potential front. In 272, Aurelian intervenes in the east. He crosses the Balkans, crosses the Bosporus, and advances through Asia Minor into Syria. Within months, the picture is clear. Palmyra is defeated, Zenobia is captured, and in 273, a second uprising is crushed for good. Here, the details of the battle don't matter. The effect does. For Aurelian, what counts is what the campaign gives back. Inner Syria returns to Roman control. Cities like Antioch fall back into the imperial orbit. Links toward the Euphrates are reopened. Access to Egypt and Alexandria, an essential hub for Mediterranean supplies, is no longer in doubt. Operationally, the East is not just rediscovered territory. It is a corridor reopened. It proves the center can still intervene quickly, on short notice, and impose obedience across great distances. But the Eastern campaign also teaches a lesson. In 273, Palmyra rises again. What a campaign regains can slip away if it is not held continuously. Military victory does not automatically translate into stable control once the army marches away. When Aurelian leaves Syria, the East is formally back under Roman authority, but the empire still depends on turning victory into lasting administration. That is the difference between reconquering territory and truly unifying it. In AD 274, after restoring the East, Aurelian turns west. The goal is no longer to contain a crisis, but to close a fracture that has been open since 260. Beyond the Alps, the Gallic Empire has existed for over a decade. It was born when Rome could not guarantee security and regular pay on every frontier. In Gaul, authority rebuilt itself locally. The march begins from northern Italy. Imperial forces cross the Alpine passes and enter Gaul along the major road corridors that link the Po Plain to the Rhone Valley and to enter Gaul. This is no limited expedition. Sources give no exact numbers, but it is plausible that Aurelian concentrates several tens of thousands of men, legionary infantry and mobile cavalry, for a decisive campaign to end it. On the other side stands Tetrarchy I, Emperor of the Gallic Empire, with his political center at Trier and control of Gaul and, formerly, Britain. Numbers are uncertain, but the forces are substantial and comparable in scale to the imperial army. The Gallic army is not an improvised rebel band. It is a structured military apparatus that has defended the Rhine frontier for years. Aurelian's strategy is clear: avoid a long war and hit the command system. He advances along a corridor meant to separate Inner Gaul from the Rhine line, breaking cohesion between political centers and frontier forces. He forces the Gallic Empire to choose: defend its political heart or defend the frontier. It is a way to split and weaken Tetrarchy's forces before a decisive clash in open battle. The decisive clash comes in 274, in an area that late sources link to Chalons, though the exact location remains debated. The battle is not described in detail, but the outcome is clear. Tetrarchy either surrenders or is captured. Accounts differ. Late writers even hint at another possibility, that he sought a negotiated exit under military pressure and internal fragility to save his army and himself. Details are shaky, but the political fact remains. The West chooses to return to Rome, and the Gallic Empire stops existing as an autonomous entity. Some late sources say Tetrarchy is spared and reintegrated, and given an administrative post in Italy. That, too, is reunification, turning an enemy into an imperial official inside the system. Reunification is complete. From the Atlantic to the east, the empire is formally under one emperor again. But the West does not give way because it vanishes overnight. It yields because it is worn down. Years of pressure on the Rhine frontier, problems of legitimacy, dynastic instability, and isolation have weakened cohesion. Aurelian strikes when the structure still functions, but is fragile. In 274, the empire is won again, not through symbolic conquest, but because separate command centers have been eliminated. The fracture opened 14 years earlier is closed by a rapid, concentrated campaign carried out at the right moment. Now the question is whether political unity can become lasting stability in practice. In 274, after Tetrarchy is defeated, no alternative imperial centers remain. From the Atlantic to Syria, Gaul returns under Aurelian's direct control. The East was brought back under control the year before, and the Danubian belt is stabilized. In this context, the title Restitutor Orbis appears, restorer of the world. It isn't just celebration, but a political statement. After 14 years of fragmentation, imperial unity is credited to one man's initiative. But reunifying does not automatically stabilize. Structures that adapted to division must now answer to a single center again and rebuild routines of obedience. Provincial governors, frontier commanders, and urban elites have to realign with an authority that for years was not the only one. In 274, Aurelian celebrates a triumph in Rome. The public image is an empire reassembled, but the balance remains personal. Cohesion depends on the emperor's presence and energy, on his ability to move fast from one front to another. In AD 275, while marching east, Aurelian is assassinated in Thrace. He does not fall to an external enemy, but to an internal conspiracy. The empire he reunified suddenly finds itself without its center of gravity. His death leaves a fundamental question. Can a state this fast survive if its unity depends so heavily on the initiative of a single man? And from that question, the next phase of the crisis begins. In AD 284, an army returns from the east, marching through Asia Minor. At its center is Emperor Numerian, carried in a closed litter and kept out of sight. Officially, he is ill. In fact, he has been dead for days. When the truth comes out, the chain of command breaks instantly. An army cannot march without an emperor. One man steps forward, Diocletian. Tradition says that to cement his power, he kills the man accused of the murder right in front of the troops. These are the years after Aurelian's death, the moment it becomes clear that Rome can no longer depend on one man. Now the question is different. How can Diocletian reorganize the empire so it survives? In AD 275, after Aurelian is assassinated, the question of succession opens up again. In Rome, Marcus Claudius Tacitus is recognized as emperor, with the Senate playing a major role. But he cannot stay in the capital. Almost immediately, the priority shifts back to war, and Tacitus heads east. Between 275 and 276, new incursions hit Asia Minor. The names shift in the sources. Goths, Heruli, sometimes Scythians, but the pattern is clear. Groups from the Black Sea and Pontic region exploit the succession crisis and push on to the Anatolian plateau. The places most often mentioned are Cappadocia and Cilicia, the corridor from the interior down through the Taurus passes to the coastal plains. This is not a Persian war. or a grand conquest campaign. It is a series of opportunistic raids, enough to destabilize a crucial hinge between Europe and Syria. Tacitus is portrayed as close to the senatorial world, an attempt to give the succession a more Roman, stable face. But events move fast. In 276, Tacitus dies amid this emergency. Sources disagree on whether it was illness or murder. The next transition comes immediately. Florian, a relative of Tacitus, is proclaimed in the West and initially recognized by many provinces and their troops. In less than a year, the empire changes emperors again and again. Tacitus rules for months. Florian lasts weeks. In the east, meanwhile, the armies raise another name, Probus, an experienced commander. For several weeks, there are 2 Augusti, and the struggle shifts to Asia Minor. Florian's reign ends the same way many do. His own men abandon and kill him. Probus becomes sole emperor. The empire does not collapse. On paper, it is still one. But this begins a decade in which stability rests not on clear rules of succession, but on who controls the decisive units, and who can impose authority fastest in the field. In 276, after Florian's brief reign ends, Probus is left as the sole Augustus. A career commander who rose through the army, he rules like many 3rd century emperors, not from a palace, but on the move, along a military itinerary. His reign lasts 6 years, from 276 to 282, and the empire's respite is only temporary. Between 277 and 278, Probus concentrates forces in Gaul and along the Rhine after years of strain and raids. The sources speak of campaigns against the Franks and the Alemanni, not one decisive battle, but a sequence of operations to repel incursions, retake towns, and install security along the Rhine line. Fighting shifts between key points on the front, the Cologne region and the corridor toward Trier. The goal is to make the frontier work again as a system, with garrisons, roads, and fortified posts. In 278 to 279, the center of gravity shifts to the Danube, in the provinces of Pannonia and Moesia. Pressure comes from groups beyond the river, Sarmatians and Carpi, in the source's usual labels, and the response is the same: rapid marches, pursuits, and counter-raids, and above all, the emperor's personal presence where the line threatens to give way. The empire stays united, but command shuttles constantly between the Rhine and the Danube. Probus has one striking trait: he uses soldiers as labor. Beyond campaigns, the army is put to work. Drainage, canals, fortifications, even vineyards, in an attempt to make the military machine productive in peacetime. But it also weighs on the troops and can breed resentment among hardened veterans. Around 280, local usurpations flare up. Probus crushes them, but the warning remains. Legitimacy is fragile when the emperor is far away. In 282, while at Sirmium in Pannonia, Probus is killed in a mutiny. Once again, it is not an external enemy who brings down the emperor, but internal violence. Out of that vacuum, Carus emerges as a successor, and attention swings back once more to the great eastern frontier. In 282, after Probus is killed, power passes to Carus. It marks a shift. For years, the empire's energy had been absorbed by the Rhine and Danube. Now attention turns east again, in force, to a frontier that works as a system of cities, rivers, and corridors leading into Mesopotamia. In 283, Carus launches a campaign against the Sasanians under Bahram II. He advances along the Euphrates-Tigris corridor into the heart of Mesopotamia. The Roman army reaches and occupies areas near Seleucia and Ctesiphon, the great Persian imperial capital on the Tigris. The broad outline of the expedition is clear, but the details and the true scale of its success remain poorly documented. In 283, the Mesopotamian campaign, probably near Ctesiphon itself, the emperor dies abruptly. The cause is unclear. Some accounts speak of illness, others claim a lightning bolt struck the imperial camp. With Carus gone, command passes to his sons, who already held titles and a share of power. Carinus governs the west from Italy, while Numerian stays in the east with the army and begins the long march through Asia Minor. During that return march in 284, the crisis takes on an almost unreal, eerie tone. Sources say Numerian travels in a closed litter, keeping hidden from his men, officially because of eye trouble. Then the soldiers sense something is wrong. Tradition says the truth is discovered only when the stench becomes impossible to ignore. Numerian has been dead for days, and the column keeps moving, without knowing or daring to admit that it has lost its emperor. It is a macabre episode, but it reveals the deeper problem. If an emperor can vanish on the march, succession is not governed by rules. It is governed by emergency. In 284, the crisis narrows to one brutal fact. The Eastern Army is marching back through Asia Minor, where Numerian is found dead inside his litter. The chain of command breaks, and the question becomes immediate. Who controls the army, and with what legitimacy? On November 20th, 284, near Nicomedia in Bithynia, the troops proclaim Diocletian, a senior officer of the Eastern Army, emperor. He will take the name Diocletian. The proclamation is immediately shadowed by suspicion. The main accused is Aper, the Praetorian prefect blamed for Numerian's death. This is where a famous but uncertain episode appears. Diocletian is said to have killed Aper in front of the assembled soldiers. We do not know if it happened exactly that way, but the political message is clear. The new authority responds to an internal crisis and claims legitimacy through a deliberate public act. To become sole Augustus, Diocletian and Carneus must converge on the Balkans. Legitimacy will be decided there, in battle. In 285, the decisive clash comes near the Margus, the river often identified with the Morava, in the Balkan-Danubian zone. We do not know the maneuvers in detail, but this is not a minor encounter. It is plausible that both sides field forces on the order of 20,000 to 30,000 men, legionary infantry backed by mobile cavalry. In armies of that size, even small percentage losses mean thousands of men, and a real risk of command breaking down. Carinus dies during or just after the battle, probably killed by one of his own officers, perhaps for personal motives. Whatever the exact sequence, the political fact is blunt. The last rival falls because of an internal rupture, once again, not because of an external enemy. Diocletian remains sole emperor, but the sequence from 275 to 285 has already proved a point. An empire this large cannot depend on the presence and speed of a single man. From that realization comes the most important choice of his reign, turning power from something personal into something structural. After the victory of 285, Diocletian sees that an empire stretching from the Rhine to the Euphrates cannot be held by one man anymore. Late in 285 and into 286, he elevates Maximian, first as Caesar, then as Augustus. Propaganda shifts as well. Diocletian links himself to Jupiter, Maximian to Hercules. Power is presented as something higher than the man who happens to hold it. This is a political decision even more than a military one. Two centers of command, east and west, so you can react without waiting weeks for an emperor to march across the map. The clearest sign is geographic. Emperors no longer live in Rome. They choose frontier base cities, Nicomedia in the east, Mediolanum in the west. Rome becomes a symbol. Command is decentralized. The need is immediate. In Gaul, revolts break out, known in the sources as the Bagaudae, and Maximian suppresses them. The Bagaudae are not a foreign army. They are local groups, peasants and deserters, turning insecurity and tax pressure into rebellion. This is not only about barbarians on the frontier. It is about internal instability in the countryside and local networks that can erode Roman control from within. And while the West tries to catch its breath, a new internal front opens. Between 286 and 293, a naval commander, Carausius, sets himself up as an independent ruler in Britain and along the Channel coast. The point is telling. Carausius does not present himself as a mere rebel. He mints coins and produces imperial-style propaganda, trying to look legitimate, as if power could exist outside the center. For Rome, the Channel is a watery frontier. If you control the fleets and the ports, you can keep Britain separate from the mainland. In 293, Diocletian formalizes the answer. The Tetrarchy is born. 2 Augusti and 2 Caesars, each with territorial responsibilities. This is not the division of the empire. It is the division of command. 4 men, 4 courts, 4 zones meant to cut response times. Galerius is assigned the Danubian and eastern sector, Constantinus Chlorus the Gallic one. Command centers multiply too, each closer to its frontier. Nicomedia for Diocletian, Mediolanum for Maximian. Trier becomes Constantinus's western base, while the Danubian zone remains Galerius's pivot. The idea is simple. Spread command so a sudden vacuum cannot reopen the crisis. And it delivers results. In 296, Constantinus reconquers Britain, ending the regime of Electus, Carausius' successor. In parallel, between 296 and 299, Galerius fights the Sasanians. After a difficult opening phase, the Tetrarchic machine wins a decisive success and imposes a treaty that stabilizes the eastern frontier after years of pressure and raids. And in 297 to 298, Diocletian intervenes in Egypt and besieges Alexandria, a reminder that major Mediterranean nodes cannot simply be left hanging. On top of that comes an attempt to impose discipline from above. In 301, the Edict on Maximum Prices tries to curb price instability. This is no vague proclamation. It is a huge list, with more than 1,000 entries for goods and wages. It is the state trying to put a price on chaos. In 303, the Great Persecution begins, another instrument of state control, this time religious and ideological. In 305, Diocletian makes an almost unprecedented move. He abdicates. Power passes by rule, not by assassination or sudden acclamation. And in a famous tradition, when asked to return, he says he would rather tend his cabbages at his residence in Split. Aurelian reunified Rome with force and speed. Diocletian tries to make it governable through structure by design. If this journey through the 3rd century crisis helped you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to support the project.